Welcome to KetoMealsAndRecipes.com. Today's recipe is a follow-up to my 2-ingredient soft-serve ice cream video, so I'm keeping my promise and let's get right into making my ice cream birthday cake. That, of course, is keto, sugar-free, and gluten-free, as are all of my recipes. I want you to know that this ice cream cake is really delicious. I think it's a perfect anytime cake, and I like to serve it for special occasions such as birthdays, Father's Day, Christmas, Easter, you get the idea. Or I like to serve it in the summertime because it's a refreshing summertime treat. Before making my version of the ice cream birthday cake, I would like to acknowledge and thank Emma's Goodies for the inspiration. The link to her original recipe will be in the description below, as well as the links to my sugar-free sweetened condensed milk, the 2-ingredient ice cream, and the written recipe for this ice cream cake. So go check them out there, please. Now, to continue with this sugar-free, gluten-free adaptation, I want you to know that the macronutrient ratio for my keto ice cream cake is 6:1, with 5.1 grams of total carbs, 1.7 grams of dietary fiber, resulting in 3.4 grams of net carbs per generous serving. Because we can't just rush to the store and get pre-made ingredients, there are a few prep steps that I'd like to advise you of. And one of the first things I do whenever I'm making a cake, first I'm going to preheat the oven for this cake to 180 degrees Celsius or 360 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm also going to line a 30 centimeter by 42 centimeter, which is 12 inch by 17 inch baking sheet with a big piece of parchment paper. And also crease the parchment to make the edges nice and clean and the corners crisp. Also, very lightly grease the surface of the parchment paper. This will make it much easier to remove the sheet pan cake when you're ready to do so. As I mentioned, because this cake requires you to make my 2-ingredient soft-serve ice cream, you will need to make a full batch of my sugar-free sweetened condensed milk, and once it's made, let it cool to room temperature before using. Since I don't always have my Lakanto monk fruit-based sweetener available, I recently started using xylitol, and to my surprise, I found that both my sweetened condensed milk and my ice cream is turning out much better. It doesn't crystallize and stays creamier and has a more velvety mouthfeel. But if you do use xylitol, be careful if you have pets. And the other thing I want to mention about the xylitol, it actually behaves and gives the same texture as allulose, but is a better 1-to-1 ratio and is a lot less expensive than allulose, which I can't find anywhere locally. A last prep step you should do is to bloom your cocoa. Do this by pouring some warm brewed coffee into the measuring cup and by adding your Dutch cocoa powder and then stirring until the mixture is well combined and smooth, velvety, and completely lump-free. Before setting aside, it's really important that you do make sure that there are no lumps in this mixture. Okay, all my prep steps are done, so let's now make the sheet pan cake. To a large mixing bowl or your stand mixer bowl, add your room temperature whole eggs and the vanilla. Whisk at medium speed until the eggs are pale yellow, frothy, and you notice that the volume has increased a little bit. You want the volume to increase because that indicates that enough air has been added, which will make your sponge cake softer. While you continue whisking, you start adding your finely ground sweetener, toss in the finely ground salt and baking powder. Stir your bloomed cocoa mixture and pour into the egg mixture. Because I find that my almond flour is usually clumpy, I always like to aerate by placing a fine mesh sieve over my mixing bowl, tossing in the almond flour, and whisking it through the sieve. And continue whisking to combine. But remember to stop and scrape the bowl, both sides and bottom, to ensure that all the ingredients have been well incorporated. And this is how you make your sheet pan cake batter. So easy, don't you agree? It is now time to pour your batter onto the parchment-lined baking sheet. Then lightly tap the pan on the counter. This will help to distribute the batter evenly over the entire surface. And use your spatula to distribute the batter, paying special attention to reaching the sides and tucking everything into the corners nicely. Now put the baking tray with the batter into the middle position of your preheated oven. Set your timer for 10 minutes. The cake will look a little bit wet when it's first done, so if need be, bake it for 2 more minutes, but no more than 12 minutes altogether, or else your cake will be too dry when it cools. While the sheet cake is baking, there's just enough time to make my soft serve ice cream. Here's a quick review of how to make the no machine version of this soft serve ice cream. In a clean mixing bowl, add the heavy whipping cream and vanilla, whip to a light peak stage. Add the room temperature sweetened condensed milk and whip to combine. And while you're whipping, if you notice that your cream is starting to look a little bit too thick or stiff peak stage, stop whipping and use a spatula to finish folding everything together. You don't want to over whip because your soft serve ice cream will turn into a sweet butter. And although possibly tasty, would not be the ideal thing for this recipe. And I'm sure you won't be happy with that. Then cover the bowl with a lid and place this ice cream mixture into the refrigerator until you need it. But don't put this into the freezer. You don't want it hard. You just want it kept fresh. My cake is done, so it's time to remove it from the oven and let it cool in the pan for 10 minutes. Then, grabbing the parchment paper, I simply slide the cake directly onto my cooling tray and leave it there to cool to room temperature. It's really important that you let this cake cool completely before using it with the soft serve ice cream. When you test and your cake is cool, cut it into 2 equal halves along the longer side. To keep your serving tray nice and clean, place strips of parchment onto the serving platter in such a way that the parchment can be pulled out easily from underneath the cake when you're all done frosting. Then get one of the 2 halves of the cake and put it on top of the parchment. It's finally time to assemble the cake. Get your bowl from the refrigerator and place about 1/2 of the soft serve ice cream mixture into a piping bag. Then pipe the ice cream along the outer perimeter of your cake. Then squeeze out the rest of your soft serve ice cream into the center of the cake and use a spatula to spread it out. And then try to make the depth as even as you possibly can. Next, carefully lay the second half of your sheet cake on top of the ice cream layer, being careful to match the corners and sides as well as you can. I think at this point it looks like a giant ice cream sandwich. I think I could eat the whole thing. It may not be good for me, but I could eat the whole thing. Distribute the rest of the ice cream on top using a spatula, or if you prefer, a bench scraper. Level and smooth the surface and sides of the cake, making this top layer as smooth as you possibly can. And now that you've completely assembled your cake, you can take a moment and trim the edges now, or after your cake has been in the freezer, as I will describe later. The cake looks lovely as it is now, nice and simple, or you can do an optional step and garnish it with a garnish of your choice, or as I'm going to do, garnish it by sprinkling chocolate shavings along the outer perimeter. I'm really proud of how professional this cake looks. And it's not that hard to do. If you have a moment after you make this cake, I would really love to see your creation, so please take a photo and tag me on your Instagram. The cake is finally assembled and completely finished, so it's time to put the cake into the freezer for a minimum of 8 hours, or even overnight. This is in order so that there's enough time for the soft serve ice cream to set and firm up properly. Before serving, and while the cake is still slightly frozen, it's the best time to trim the ragged sides. You don't have to trim the cake, but if you're making it for a special occasion or just because you want it to look nice, I think it's a very good idea to slice off thin edges, like this. And if your cake is still frozen, let it thaw on your counter for about 10 minutes before serving. I'd like to remind you that after you serve your cake pieces, put the rest of it into the freezer right away, because the cake will melt, especially if the weather's warm outside or your room is warm. I forgot to mention, as always, the trim sides are the baker's bonus, so dig in and enjoy. And here's a final tip, a storing tip I'd like to share with you. Like all Dairy Queen frozen cakes, or any frozen ice cream cake, this cake can be frozen. But do place the ice cream cake in an airtight freezer-safe container. I hope that you have found my instructional recipe video helpful and useful. If you did, please like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, leave me a comment, and share the link with a friend or family member. Most of all, thank you very much for watching my video, and please come back when I post the next variation of the soft serve ice cream that is sugar-free, gluten-free, and of course, keto. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you next time. Cheers!